There was a version of Elaine that her manager was comfortable with. It was the version that checked in regularly, that gave updates before being asked, that made her thinking visible, her process transparent, her reasoning easy to follow, her next move predictable. That version of Elaine no longer existed. Not because she had changed jobs, not because she had become difficult or disengaged or suddenly careless about the work, because somewhere in her 3rd year at the company, she had quietly stopped performing her own internal process for the benefit of people who had never once performed theirs for her.
She still delivered, always on time, always above standard, always without the drama that surrounded the work of people who required more maintenance than she did. But she had stopped explaining herself. And something shifted. Not in her output, not in her relationships with colleagues, not in any metric that appeared on any performance review she had ever received. It shifted in how her manager looked at her when she entered a room. There was a tension there that had not existed before. A specific kind of watchfulness. The kind that does not show up in formal feedback, but exists in every interaction, in how quickly meetings were called, in how often her name appeared in conversations she was not part of, in the way her manager's questions had started to arrive with a slightly different weight than they used to carry.
Elaine had become unreadable, and her manager had become nervous. This is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. And once you understand exactly why it happens, you will never misread that nervousness again. Here is what nobody explains about the psychology of management. A manager's primary function, underneath all the language about leadership and development and team building, is prediction. Not inspiration, not cultivation, not even direction. Prediction. A manager needs to know what their people are going to do before they do it, not because they distrust their people, because their own position, their own security, their own ability to plan, their own capacity to manage upward depends entirely on their ability to anticipate the behavior of the people beneath them. When a manager can predict you, they can account for you, they can plan around you, they can include you in decisions, exclude you from conversations, manage your presence in the room. They can answer questions about you before those questions are asked. They can tell their own manager, yes, I know exactly what that person is working on, how they are feeling, what they are likely to do next. That predictability is not just convenient, it is the foundation of the manager's sense of control. And control, the manager's ability to present themselves as someone who understands their team, is what separates the manager who feels secure from the manager who does not. Here is the first thing nobody tells you about being unreadable. When you stop being predictable, you do not simply become harder to manage, you become a source of risk. Not because you have done anything wrong, not because your performance has changed, because the manager can no longer answer questions about you with confidence, because you have removed yourself from the category of known quantities, because your next move is no longer something they can see coming, and a thing they cannot see coming is a thing they cannot prepare for. This is why the nervousness begins, not with anger, not with hostility, with a specific kind of vigilance that looks like attention but is actually surveillance. The manager starts watching more carefully, not because something has gone wrong, but because they can no longer rely on their previous model of you to tell them whether something is about to. Think about what this means structurally. Your manager has a mental model of every person on their team. That model contains predictions, how you respond to pressure, what you do when you are frustrated, what your silence means, what your enthusiasm means, when you are about to disengage, when you are about to over-deliver. When you are readable, Your manager updates that model with the information you provide. Your check-ins, your explanations, your visible enthusiasm or visible frustration. All of it feeds the model and keeps the predictions accurate. When you stop providing that information, the model goes stale. The predictions become unreliable. And a manager with unreliable predictions is a manager who has lost something they did not know they were depending on until it was gone. There is a middle manager psychology that nobody documents, but everyone experiences. When a manager encounters an employee they cannot read, an employee whose internal state is genuinely opaque, whose next move is genuinely uncertain, they face a specific kind of cognitive discomfort that the management literature rarely names directly. It is the discomfort of responsible uncertainty. A manager is accountable for their team's behavior. When their team behaves predictably, when the manager can anticipate problems, flag risks, manage expectations upward, that accountability feels manageable. The manager knows what they are responsible for because they can see it. When a team member becomes unreadable, when the manager can no longer see what they are responsible for in that person, the accountability does not disappear. It becomes anxiety. Because the manager is still accountable for whatever that person does, they simply no longer know what that person is going to do. That is a specific and uncomfortable position to occupy, and most managers will do almost anything to get out of it. Some will schedule more frequent one-on-ones. Some will begin CCing themselves on communications they were never part of before. Some will start consulting HR about documentation, not because anything has happened, but because they want a paper trail that demonstrates they were paying attention in case something does. None of these responses are about your performance. All of them are about your manager's discomfort. Understanding that distinction is important, because when you see increased scrutiny, when the check-ins multiply, when your name appears in conversations you were not invited to, when your manager's questions arrive with more weight than they used to, it is easy to interpret that scrutiny as evidence of a problem. It is not evidence of a problem. It is evidence of leverage. The employee who is scrutinized carefully is the employee that matters. The employee who is managed efficiently and without friction is the employee the organization has fully priced, has already decided exactly what they are worth and exactly what it would cost to replace them. You do not want to be efficiently managed. You want to be carefully managed. Here is the second thing nobody tells you. The nervousness your manager feels around an unreadable employee is not about you specifically. It is about what your unreadability represents to them. You represent a gap in their control architecture, a variable they cannot account for, a person-shaped unknown in a system that was designed to function on knowns. And the way most managers respond to that gap is not by accepting it, it is by trying to close it. This is why the questions change, why the check-ins become more frequent, why your name starts appearing in conversations you are not part of, why your manager suddenly needs more updates than they used to. They are not trying to micromanage you. They are trying to rebuild the model you stopped feeding. They are trying to make you readable again. And here's what this means for how you navigate it. The unreadable employee has leverage the readable employee does not. Because the manager's discomfort is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that the dynamic has shifted, that you have moved from a position of transparent predictability, where your manager could plan around you without effort, to a position of strategic opacity, where your manager has to engage with you to understand you. That engagement is not a problem, it is positioning.
The readable employee is managed. The unreadable employee is negotiated with. Here is the third thing, and this is the one that changes how you operate. There is a difference between being unreadable and being unavailable, and most people who try to use opacity as leverage confuse the two. Being unavailable means withholding, not communicating, creating friction, making yourself difficult to work with in ways that generate resentment instead of respect. This does not produce leverage, it produces isolation. And isolated employees do not accumulate power, they accumulate exit paperwork. Being unreadable is something entirely different. It means your manager knows what you have done. They do not know what you are going to do. They know your output. They do not know your process. They know your results. They do not know your ceiling. They know you are performing. They do not know whether you are performing at 80% of your capacity or 110%. They do not know how much you have left. They do not know how much you would give if the circumstances were right, or how quickly you would stop giving if the circumstances became wrong.
That uncertainty is not a problem for you. It is an asset. Because an employee whose ceiling is unknown is an employee whose value is uncontained. The organization cannot fully account for you, cannot fully price you, cannot fully manage the risk of losing you, because it does not fully know what losing you would cost. There is one more dimension to this that matters, and it is perhaps the most counterintuitive part of the entire framework. The unreadable employee is often perceived as more competent than the readable one, even when their output is identical. This is not fair. It is not rational. It is simply how organizations process incomplete information. When your manager cannot fully read you, cannot fully account for your capacity, your motivation, your ceiling, they tend to fill the gap with assumption, and in most professional contexts, the assumption that fills an unknown about a high-performing employee is a positive one. They assume the ceiling is higher than they can see. They assume the motivation is stronger than what has been displayed. They assume the capacity is larger than what has been deployed. The readable employee, by contrast, has shown everything, every process, every struggle, every moment of doubt, every ceiling, all of it visible, all of it accounted for, all of it included in the model that produces the manager's assessment of their value. And a fully visible ceiling is a contained ceiling. An unknown ceiling is an unlimited one. This is why the most technically skilled person in a room is not always the most strategically positioned one. Technical skill is visible. It can be measured, assessed, priced, and managed accordingly.
Strategic opacity is not visible. It cannot be fully measured. It cannot be fully priced. And an asset that cannot be fully priced is an asset the organization will tend to overvalue, which, from your perspective, is exactly where you want to be. Elaine understood this eventually, not immediately, not when she first noticed the shift in how her manager looked at her when she entered a room, but gradually, as she watched what happened to the colleagues around her who remained fully readable, she began to understand the difference between being known and being understood, between being transparent and being legible, between giving the organization everything it asked for and giving it only what it had earned. This is the specific leverage that Elaine had accumulated without fully understanding it. Her manager was nervous, not because Elaine was threatening anything, but because Elaine's unreadability had created a gap in the manager's control architecture, and that gap, left unfilled, had a weight to it, a gravitational pull that kept the manager's attention back to her, kept her relevant, kept her present in conversations, kept her name in the room even when she was not. You cannot manufacture that relevance by performing loudly. You cannot demand it. You cannot negotiate it into existence. It emerges, quietly, structurally, when you stop performing your internal process for the convenience of people who have never offered theirs in return. The readable employee is managed efficiently. The unreadable employee is managed carefully. And careful management, the kind where your manager thinks twice before making decisions about you, where your name requires a pause before it is used, where the conversation about your future happens with more deliberation than the conversation about anyone else's. That is not a problem to be solved. That is a position to be held. Elaine did not plan any of this. She simply stopped explaining herself to someone who had never explained themselves to her. And in doing so, without strategy, without agenda, without even fully understanding what she was creating, she became the most carefully managed person in the room. I am Alex. This is Alex versus the system. Subscribe. The next one is already built.